the midnight sun. Wheels go round and round. You're on my mind. Restless heart.
When Richard Goodall first stepped onto the stage of America's Got Talent, no one expected the shy, middle-aged school janitor to capture the hearts of millions. With his modest smile, nervous energy, and a voice that carried decades of hidden emotion, Richard instantly became one of the most unforgettable contestants in the show's history. His performance of Journey's "Don't Stop Believin'" went viral, touching people not just because of his singing, but because of the story behind it. Here was a man who had spent his life in the shadows, quietly working a blue-collar job, caring for others, and putting his own dreams on hold, until one extraordinary night when he finally got his chance. But behind the applause, behind the standing ovations and glowing headlines, lies a life filled with pain, heartbreak, and struggle. Richard's story isn't just one of sudden fame, it's one of decades of hardship, loneliness, and resilience that shaped the man we saw on that stage. His journey reminds us that the spotlight often hides the scars of those who step into it. In this video, we're pulling back the curtain on the heartbreaking and tragic life of Richard Goodall. From his humble beginnings to the emotional weight he carried for years, from the highs of reality TV fame to the quiet battles he fought when the cameras turned away, this is the story that proves not all heroes wear capes. Sometimes, they carry mops, dreams, and a voice that can move the world. Richard Goodall's story begins far from the flashing lights of Hollywood or the grand stage of America's Got Talent. Born and raised in a small Midwestern town, Richard grew up in an environment where dreams were often set aside for practicality. From a young age, he had a love for music. He would sing along to the radio, mimic the soulful voices of rock legends, and lose himself in the melodies that seemed to say the things he couldn't put into words. But like many children of working-class families, he quickly learned that passion alone couldn't pay the bills. As he grew older, life pulled him in a different direction. Instead of chasing after a music career, Richard found steady employment as a school janitor. Day after day, he pushed brooms through hallways, cleaned up after kids, and made sure classrooms were ready for the next morning. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it gave him a sense of purpose. Students and teachers alike came to know him not just as the janitor, but as a kind-hearted presence, someone who always had a smile, a kind word, and a willingness to help. Yet, beneath that warm exterior, there was a lingering sadness. For decades, Richard quietly carried the weight of unfulfilled dreams. He would sing in the privacy of his home, or occasionally in local gatherings, but he never imagined that his voice would one day reach millions. Friends sometimes urged him to pursue music more seriously, telling him that he had a gift too powerful to keep hidden. But Richard, humble. By the time he reached his late 50s, Richard had come to accept that music would likely remain a private passion, something he carried with him quietly while living out a modest life. But fate had other plans. A chance opportunity would soon pull him out of obscurity and onto one of the biggest stages in the world. And when that moment arrived, all the years of quiet sacrifice, hidden heartbreak, and unspoken longing would finally pour out in a performance that stunned not just the judges of America's Got Talent, but millions watching around the world. For Richard Goodall, walking onto the America's Got Talent stage was like stepping into another world. Here was a man in his 50s, dressed simply, carrying none of the flash or polish that reality TV audiences had grown accustomed to. He wasn't there to impress with theatrics, youth, or glamour. He was there with nothing but his voice, his story, and decades of emotion bottled up inside him. When Simon Cowell asked him what he did for a living, Richard answered humbly, he was a school janitor. The audience chuckled softly at first, but not in a cruel way. It was the kind of reaction reserved for an underdog, someone you immediately wanted to root for. Then, Richard mentioned the song he would sing, "Don't Stop Believin'" by Journey, a rock anthem beloved across generations. The first few notes came out shaky, carrying the weight of his nerves. But as Richard settled into the performance, something extraordinary happened. His voice swelled, powerful yet vulnerable, soaring through the theater with a rawness that silenced every skeptic in the room. By the time he reached the chorus, the audience was on its feet, clapping, cheering, and singing along. The janitor from Terre Haute, Indiana, had just delivered one of the most unforgettable performances in AGT history. The judges were floored. Simon, often known for his cutting remarks, praised Richard for his authenticity, reminding viewers that true talent often comes from the most unexpected places. Heidi Klum and Sofia Vergara gushed about the emotion in his voice, while Howie Mandel called him the heart of America. Overnight, Richard became more than just a contestant, he became a symbol of hope for every overlooked dreamer. Clips of his performance went viral, spreading across social media platforms and news outlets. Millions who had never heard of Richard Goodall suddenly knew his name. People were inspired not just by his voice, but by his story, the janitor who had quietly swept school hallways for decades finally standing in the spotlight where he belonged. His journey resonated because it reflected something deeply human, the idea that it's never too late to chase a dream. But while the world celebrated Richard's newfound fame, few understood the emotional storm swirling beneath his calm exterior. For Richard, the stage was not just about singing, it was about years of loneliness, sacrifices, and struggles finally finding release. Ever. An overnight sensation. But what the cameras and viral headlines didn't show was the toll that sudden fame took on a man who had lived his entire life quietly, far away from the chaos of Hollywood. For Richard, stepping into the spotlight wasn't just about sharing his voice, it was about exposing his vulnerability to the entire world. Almost immediately, Richard was faced with challenges he had never anticipated. Fame, though exciting, brought with it scrutiny and pressure. Social media, which had initially been a platform of love and support, also carried harsh criticism. Some questioned his talent, others mocked his appearance or his age. For a man who had spent decades quietly serving his school community, those unkind words cut deeply. The world that had embraced him so passionately also revealed its crueler side. Financial struggles also remained a painful reality. Despite the viral fame, Richard didn't suddenly become wealthy. Reality TV shows like AGT don't guarantee financial security, and once the cameras stop rolling, many contestants find themselves back where they started, except now burdened with public expectations. Richard returned to Terre Haute, where life hadn't magically transformed. He still faced bills, responsibilities, and the same modest lifestyle he had before. But perhaps the greatest challenge Richard faced was emotional. For years, he had lived with loneliness, channeling his pain into music. Now, thrust into fame, that loneliness didn't vanish, it was magnified. The high of performing for millions was followed by the low of going home to a quiet, empty space. The contrast was jarring, and it weighed heavily on him. Fans celebrated him as a hero, but Richard often admitted to feeling overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Health concerns also played a role in his struggles. Years of working physically demanding jobs and carrying emotional burdens had taken their toll. While Richard didn't publicly share every detail, it was clear that he wasn't in the same physical shape as the young performers he often competed against. Traveling, rehearsing, and keeping up with the demands of sudden celebrity life drained him. His body, like his spirit, carried the marks of a hard-lived life. Still, Richard pushed forward, not for fame or fortune, but for the people who had supported him. He performed at local events, lent his voice to causes, and remained grounded in his Midwestern roots. But the spotlight was not always kind. When the television cameras moved on to newer contestants and fresher stories, Richard was left to navigate the difficult reality of fading fame. For many contestants, that transition is heartbreaking, one moment adored by millions, the next, forgotten by the same world that had cheered so loudly. Through it all, Richard maintained a sense of humility. He never blamed others for his hardships, and he often reminded fans that he was grateful for every opportunity, no matter how fleeting. But privately, the Waag